Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other host, the Maverick.
Brian, hi.
Brian, how are you doing this week?
Yeah, I'm okay.
This week we are going to be talking about Season 4, Episode 17 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, entitled Superstar.
Sure are. It's actually just where the Scooby Gang sings the Karen Carpenter song over and over again.
And not Jesus Christ Superstar, maybe a much more popular piece
What?
Yeah, absolutely. People love Jesus Christ Superstar. People love Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah, people love Jesus Christ Superstar, but it's not like significantly more popular than the Carpenter song.
Sounds like you're going to hell.
Okay. Like, don't you remember you told me you love me, baby? Okay,
that was pretty good.
See?
It's a
great song.
Do you want to kick us off with a Buffy Ann summary?
Yeah, sure. Let's go. So this is Season 4, Episode 17, Superstar. It was first aired on April 4th, 2000. It was written by Jane Espenson, who last wrote A New Man, and directed by David Grossman, who last wrote Wild at Heart. And here is your Buffy Ann summary. Suddenly Jonathan is a world-famous hero and Buffy his sidekick. Everyone, male and female, is besotted with him. Buffy realizes something is wrong when Jonathan is weak against a demon that shares his tattoo. His world-changing spell created an evil demon for balance. When he and Buffy kill it, things return to normal. Jonathan helps Buffy forgive Riley for sleeping with Faith. It's actually not bad.
Yeah. So this is the Jonathan episode, and this is your standard alternate universe episode of television.
Yeah, so it's the second foray into alternate universes of Buffy. The first being The Wish, obviously, which I was surprised didn't get a mention in this episode at all. You know, given Anya was like conferred with in terms of alternate universes. But I'm not 100% certain that she actually remembers that happened. I don't think
she absolutely does.
Sure?
Yeah, because when she was first human, she was complaining about how I think she definitely makes reference to it.
Okay. And the next foray into reality bending, obviously being whatchamacallit?
Obviously.
Well, no, sorry. Obviously being when Dawn comes, essentially.
Season 5.
Season 5. Okay. So, Joel, what did you want to talk about this week for the bronze banter?
Yeah, so I think we had called a shot last week that we were going to talk about Bon Appetit Test Kitchen, and specifically the
really
racism.
wholesome, lovely thing that we told all our millions of followers to listen to or to watch before Christmas because we liked it so much. Oh my God, what's wrong with my voice? But it's been besotted with issues of racism, apparently.
I think all those points stand. I think the content is still fantastic. I think the people involved are fantastic content creators. But what has the rift that has fissured out during the last few weeks in light of the nationwide and worldwide higher profile of issues of systemic racism and protests against the same is issues of systemic racism within Bon Appetit and within Condé Nast, which is their parent organization. So it's a little bit fascinating, actually, because I'm rarely in on the ground floor with any of these kind of scandals. But I specifically saw it unfold in real time. And so essentially what you have is that you have all these popular personalities who are chefs in the kitchen, and they all have their own programs or their own contributions and all that, and people mythologize them. There's art all over Pinterest about them. The parasocial relationships are rife, and I follow a number of them on Instagram, and then one of them, Sola, was what I started Instagram about something to do with complaints against the management, specifically against
Adam Rappaport, who
was the editor-in-chief for Bon Appetit. And I suppose what basically kicked off this whole avalanche of issues coming to light was that Adam Rappaport had made a comment about their issue. There was issues about there not being a place for Puerto Rican food in the magazine, and a Puerto Rican writer had pitched something and he had said that it wasn't the right time or something to that effect.
Sure.
And then someone replied to that saying, well, here's a picture of him 13 years ago in brown face as a stereotypical Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
Maybe,
which was bizarre because everyone who has seen it has been like, I've never met a person like that who was Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
Like, typical stereotypes where it's simplifying people down to a situation where they don't actually
and combining bizarre signifiers. But so essentially the argument, the lol was like, well, maybe he should just be writing the Puerto Rican content since he's obviously a racist who thinks that it's not relevant or whatever. And so this inflamed a number of the people of color, understandably, on the staff, starting with Sola, who was the first to be very vocal about it. And kind of the reverse of your experience with Kevin Spacey is I've always really liked Sola. I always thought she was weirdly, or just like specifically notably very outspoken and very like took no shit from anyone on the show.
Sure.
And so I was very happy that she was the kind of the one to like kick this off. But basically, it started this really fascinating but really difficult conversation about how the people of color in Bon Appetit are specifically marginalized in the sense of that they're
not paid for their video appearances.
So a really profitable part of the Bon Appetit culture is like they work directly for the magazine or for the test kitchen to develop recipes, and separately they can be employed as entertainment to do this YouTube content. But the people of color who were appearing in the videos weren't getting paid for their time, where in some cases, and this kind of started off people who were currently on the staff, people were previously on the staff, everyone started chipping in. But like the disparity being that in one case there was a black woman who was on last year who was very good and very personable, who got paid $400 for the 2 videos she made.
I think each, in fairness.
Yeah, each. Yeah, exactly. But so
it's nothing.
And whereas by contrast, the rumors
I'm paid to appear on this podcast in comparison.
That's our Patreon minimum tier. By comparison, some of the white staff members who had lucrative kind of frontline entertainment roles in the show are rumored to be paid thousands per episode.
Yeah, Claire Sappins, I think, gets paid $20,000 per episode.
That is the rumor, yeah. But it's been equal parts, I think, kind of harrowing, but also like I think something that's really important to bear in mind with this stuff is, yes, it's very difficult to have to discuss this all the time, but it is happening all the time. The discussion should be, to a certain extent, the release valve, because I think there can be a doubling, particularly for people who are white and people who are not in the minority.
Yeah, they think that the worst thing that can happen in a situation is this part, is
they're
talking about it in the fallout. And actually, no, the worst thing that can happen in a situation is that fucking happening to you, is not being paid for your like hard work in an equitable way with everyone around you. And like, there's conversations there to be had around like, maybe I would personally think that Claire Sappins 100% like if she managed to negotiate that amount, she more than deserves it, in the sense that like she's an incredibly charismatic, very entertaining person. But it's also undoubtable that she's gotten probably more opportunities because she's white, and she's also viewed more positively because she's white by a larger amount of people. The
food she produces or the recipes she develops aren't considered ethnic foods, etc., etc. Yeah. So it's opened up like I think a really, in many ways, really accessible conversation, because it is about something that is usually much more of an entertainment space. To start having these, or to engage with some of the criticism or some of the thinking that applies across the board in some cases much more severe circumstances, because one by one various people on the team released different statements from their position, and they eventually called for Adam Rappaport to be held accountable.
Yeah, they used what is the most important bargaining chip in anyone's cachet, arsenal, which is, they threatened with solidarity essentially. So they all said they would not appear in any more videos until they like started back paying the people of color who had worked there. And Claire specifically said that she was calling them to not release any further of her videos that they had stored until they've been paid and changes happened, which is all really positive.
And obviously an incredibly crucial part of actual allyship is using your position, your privilege, putting yourself in the same firing line that people of color will be in, and saying, well, I'm the most popular, or probably the most highest earning person, and you can't use it. And so I think what's really interesting is like, yes, what Adam Rappaport did 13 years ago, that specific incident, is racist, but that is not the primary issue. It's an example of a racism that is prevalent in the sense of thinking it's appropriate. It speaks to his character, but the main issue to focus on is, I think, headlines where it's like, editor-in-chief fired for racist photo from 13 years ago really dilutes the issue, which is like, this is one example amongst dozens and dozens of a systemic racism that he perpetrated, but also other people did, and other people haven't let go since. And there's other issues in other magazines and entertainment units.
One of the really funny parts was Anthony Pereski apparently was interviewed by someone on the staff for Bon Appetit, and what's his name?
Andy.
who is Persian.
Yeah. So he's Persian and gay.
Yeah, it basically tanked this story because he doesn't like Anthony. Like specifically, he's like had like a personal vendetta against this guy. So one of the other like people of color in the office had written these stories about Anthony Bresky, and Andy tanked them. And she was like, you know, how dare you when you'd done this to me? And it all just became like a real shit.
It's the kind of thing where you want to have stand somewhere and say, well, this person is obviously the bad guy, but you can't do that in these kind of intersectional arguments, because here you have on one side you know, Andy saying that as, you know, a fairly prominent Persian chef, that he wants to help other people of color, and that he's very upset by things that happen to him here. But then people who are in less of a position of privilege saying, well, you've actually been part of the problem because you kind of got up and maybe pulled the ladder up a bit, and also argue your problem with Anthony Borowski as like a, you know, something
worth like, you know, fucking over another person of color for.
And then you have other white people on the staff, with like one guy in specific who's like, oh, I'm in solidarity with this, and other people have been like, well, here's this video of you calling people faggots like 7 years ago, and it's such a, like, it's not funny, but it's just like, it is hysterical, as in like, it is elevatedly satirically bizarre how it's falling apart. So yeah, and for something that
it was seen as so like wholesome and positive and kind.
Yeah, and like I think it's very, you know, there's a very important point you made there about the fact that like your wholesomeness and the things you enjoy shouldn't be so impermeable to criticism, because the danger there can be, it's like, oh no, not Bon Appetit too, where that can be, oh no, not this person too, for a number of things. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, this is going to be like, if you have Bon Appetit who are so wholesome and so lovable, and if by the end of this they're unionized and socialists, do you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of like, that's an engaged way to enjoy it. But it always comes back to me for the question, like, as you said, talking about the bad thing is not the worst thing about the bad thing. The bad thing happening is the
for
problem.
Sure.
But yeah, it's specifically something that we were so near and dear to has like collapsed, and there hasn't been any video content from them since
weeks.
What I find absolutely disgusting about it, and I'll leave it on this note, in terms of the experience, the mouthfeel of the experience, is that these calls where they're discussing this with management, and calls where you know, I know there was a call where Sola in a group meeting is like saying, Agma, I think you should resign. I don't think you're suitable to work with people of color. Like, this is over Zoom. Like, it's just people being like, sorry, I think your microphone's on mute. What did you say? Oh, I said you should resign. Disgusting.
Awful.
So speaking of awkward social circumstances that potentially also have discrimination in them, this episode of Buffy is very focused. This is the Jonathan episode, Superstar. This is, I think, one of your prototypical alternate universe episodes on genre television, particularly of a specific kind, where I think you mentioned obviously The Wish, which is absolutely an example of that. But this leans more into something which has become very prevalent in the last 20 years, which is like your light-hearted what if kind of scenario. The kind of thing that, again, I always say is kind of the bottom of the bucket for pop culture in some ways. But Supernatural has probably done about 15 of these.
I quite like the Good Fight version of it recently, the Good Fight season 4 one, where it was like, what if Hillary had won the thing? And that sounds so stupid. I know you're aware of how stupid it was when they use it to explore genuine like character points, and like they also had, it was also kind of annoying because it was like, oh, you know, the Me Too movement grew out of Donald Trump running for president because people were so enraged by it, and you know, all this stuff, and it was like, it was silly and stupid, and I liked it. It
kind of started out with like, oh well, bad things would have happened either way, and then by the end it was like, no, this is much worse. So.
Yeah, no. It won't.
So I enjoy this episode. I think primarily it's a fun episode.
Yeah.
I think there have been some more serious episodes recently.
Yeah.
The face stuff was very dark in many ways, so I think this is like a nice counterpoint to it.
It is. I went into this episode being like, oh, I'm coming for a fun, frothy, light thing. I don't think I enjoyed it very much.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well maybe we'll get into why that was.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons, one of the problems with Jonathan's world, Jonathan being, if anyone doesn't remember, like the guy who gave Buffy her class protection umbrella, who tried to shoot himself in the bell tower in earshot, and who becomes a member of the trio of nerds in season 6.
Yeah.
So a weirdly consistent character throughout the show, played by Danny Strong, who's a very likable actor.
He's a very likable actor and a great writer.
Yeah, so the world is entirely, he uses a spell, thermogenesis is the spell, so creating something from death or...
So thermogenesis is, I was reading about this on the Buffy wiki too, isn't it that specifically the idea that creating something creates another kind of like balanced...
It creates a cost. It's equivalent exchange, essentially, is what it's linked to. So the balancing force and something is taken to be given, etc. So he creates a world where he is the most powerful, interesting, and sexually attractive person in it. And therefore, there's something equally balanced to him. Now, one of the weaknesses of that in this episode is the actual monster is incredibly generic.
Yeah, like I can't even remember it at all.
No, it's just a guy in a rubber suit who I felt bad for because they kept putting him in the rain and it's like he must be sweating in that suit.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like, I think there was a missed opportunity maybe in here to do something really nightmarish, really horrifying for him to realistically be afraid of. But yeah, so what we have is...
I think the Jane Espenson element here, which Jane Espenson does write that kind of like very genuinely funny and engaging kind of content. I think her contribution here, I don't think she really contributes to genuinely horrific stuff very often. I think her style is more...
the kind of interpersonal
and like she's a great turn with comedy. So.
I read from the wiki that she has done a comic about Jonathan Superstar kind of in the week before. All this happens in universe. But it's an interesting episode in some ways, and we can discuss, you can let me know why or not you think it's a fun one to watch, but essentially what you have is a male gaze episode of Buffy.
For sure.
And in making Jonathan the most interesting person in the world, it forces Buffy to be subservient, or subservient isn't really the word I mean, but like below him in the pecking order of power and effectiveness in monster fighting, in problem solving. And what I thought was interesting watching the episode is it's such an awkward fit for her. It's a square peg in a round hole. And that is actually essentially how the episode starts to come apart.
Yeah.
Or the setting starts to come apart.
Because Buffy in herself... her existence requires a strength of character that shines through, essentially. And
the version of Buffy which is like everyone is kind of fawning over Jonathan, but more or less they're kind of the same. Buffy's personality is distinctly different. She is much more infantilized, I think, a much more kind of while being the Slayer, kind of a damsel in distress. And it requires all of her friends to be surprised that Buffy could have gotten something right for once.
Yeah. There's really something to be said here that it is men's perspective of women in power being shown, as in, like, you know, Jonathan thinks that to gain power, he needs to take it away from a woman. You know, he needs to reduce a woman's role to fill that position. Whereas, I mean, one of the best things about this season is that it's really highlighting the synergistic and like family structure of the show, which is that like no one needs to be solely the most powerful person. It's all contributing to a network of support and of power.
Yeah, like, so there's the classic kind of community or collectivist approach to power or to empowerment, where Buffy is stronger and the cause is stronger by raising people up with her. You know, it was iron sharpens iron. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Whereas Jonathan requires everyone to be lesser than him. Yeah. And I think a fundamental, and we're seeing more and more of that, to be honest, these days, is an understanding that some people think there's a finite amount of agency and power and it has to be taken, as opposed to it being something that can flourish in tandem with other people. So you get a lot of weird stuff from the Jonathan perspective in terms of, you know, there's all this comic elements of he starred in The Matrix, which I'm sure was a very hot reference to make.
Yeah, being Jonathan Levinson.
Being Jonathan Levinson. Yeah, that he's a basketball star, with Danny Strong being, I think, below average height would be one way to describe it.
Yeah.
And there's some good comedy with that. I love when they bring the world back to normal. Riley saying that did anyone else feel like they were just far too tall? Was actually quite a nice note.
And like with that, you do get, like, as you've said, kind of a lot of male gazy POV shifts here. So the kind of the tone of the structure of the episode kind of shifts as well. You get like photography, which is much more based on, as we said in the Zeppo, which I know you wanted to talk about specifically in comparison with this episode. You get a lot of Dutch angles and a lot of
glamour shots of Jonathan.
Glamour shots for sure, and lots of like very choppy editing and a lot of very stereotypical musical cues. So all throughout the episode, there's lots of like big band, like 50s jazz music, which would be like most similar to a kind of James Bond kind of theme, spy theme, and you can really see, you know, his influences shining through in the content or in the tone here, in the sense that what he considers cool has suddenly become cool, which kind of influences the structure of the episode, because all that music is non-diegetic. It's so
it's for our benefit.
Yeah, it's for our benefit.
Well, we assume.
Yeah,
I kind of feel like they react in some way as if they just heard the cool music, but yeah.
And then when everyone's at the Bronze, instead of it being a grunge band, which of course is not something that he could actually access in any way, it's like another big band kind of jazzy performance thing where he plays the trumpet and everyone's like really into it and like dancing away to it, and it's like
Casablanca kind of thing or something.
Yeah, which is, I mean, you know, a nerd's idea of what coolness is like, you know, not that you change everything around it to be what you like, as opposed to understanding what is cool about things that are cool.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think
I was surprised there weren't people in the audience wearing fedoras. That would have been appropriate.
True. It's interesting, like when you think about it, that this is a reflection of nerd culture, quote unquote. When it could still be considered nerd culture as opposed to mainstream. And I think that's been done to death, and it's really being over attenuated on things like Sherlock over the years.
Yeah.
But I actually think this is fairly astute in the sense that when he does take things that are cool, as you said, he takes and kind of puts together things which don't gel together with no sense of aesthetic or taste. And he is taking from other people in the sense that he wants to be a basketball star. Traditionally is something that has a lot of very prominent and successful black athletes. Jazz is something which is obviously dominated by very successful black musicians. He's taking power away from Buffy as like the point of the Slayer being one woman who is one girl who is strong enough to fight the demons, and him being like, what if it was a man though? Which I'm sure there was like fan fiction about that for people who missed the point of Buffy. All of it is through taking from people who have kind of earned places in what they're doing, or even him being more adept at magic than the witches, witches are the primary magic users on the show. There's
a great note in the episode where Tara and Willow are working on something, and it's from the POV. I'm gonna stop saying that, but it's from the like, it's shot like they're like preparing a spell. You know, they're kind of like putting things together, they're like crouched down together. It's really lovely, and it turns around and it shows like what they're actually doing is creating a wall to like because they're so in love with Jonathan, of like a collage of him. And it's very clearly signposted that what's going on there visually is that like Jonathan has like turned these lesbians, you know?
Yeah, actually,
that's not my phrase. That's like kind of like that shields the tone.
No, like, you know, that would be the tone of, I think, his intent. But that actually, to be honest, had gone completely over my head.
Yeah,
but yeah, 100%.
Oh no, part of his fantasy here is that like, you know, he's so beautiful, he's so like attractive that he has managed to make these lesbians obsessed with him.
Yeah, and like if it plays both ways in the sense that when he's playing, you know, the most erotic of music, you know, a jazz man, a white man with a jazz trumpet, whatever, you know, he gets both.
That's not true because it's not Chet Baker, but go on. True.
He gets both Anya and Xander so visibly horny that they have to go off and have sex.
Yeah.
And also there's a scene where Giles is shown to have purchased Jonathan's swimsuit calendar, or given as a gift, as he claims, but I've heard that one before.
Yeah, sure.
Which I enjoy, you know. I was waiting for all that to come across as a little more homophobic.
Yeah.
Or actually not. Sorry, not homophobic. What I mean is gay panic specifically. Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah, a bit. You know,
I think the come down is more like, oh, that was odd because, you know, I think Xander says like, I missed loving Jonathan or something.
Yeah, like that he'll miss how Jonathan make him like himself or something to that effect.
Yeah, feel bad himself.
Yeah, and also Xander completely drinks the Kool-Aid on the whole Jonathan thing. I think consistently throughout the show, he is the one who is like Renfield to Dracula, yes master, you know, actually literally does that with Dracula at one point, but it's just so ready to go for whatever cult is going in a given episode. Yeah,
no, it's a good note for his character. Okay, let's see. What else do we have on the docket today?
What I think is interesting with this portrayal of Jonathan is that they, you know, in many ways it's riffing Angel.
Yeah, because I mean, so one of the notable things about the episode is that the opening credits are significantly adjusted, not to include Danny Strong as Jonathan as like, you know, one of the main actors, funny enough, but to splice in loads of different glamour shots of Jonathan, with the last one being him walking towards the camera with a big flowy black coat a la Angel.
Yeah, which is funny. Now, you say significantly adjusted, but I think given that this is very prototypical of later episodes on different shows, and potentially on this show, but oftentimes a trope of that is them completely redoing the credits to a new style, and it could be Jonathan the Vampire Slayer, be the whole thing. For this, I feel like they literally were like, where can we take out 2 frames without disrupting the credits too much and insert a shot for him? It was very, you know, it's kind of like, where can we just shove him into here?
Yeah, that's true.
But what I think is funny is having established this template, Plague Straight, of Angel as kind of a dark brooding Avenger type, it's actually being satirized more than it's being used by this point, because it is the same shot that they used for Doyle when he was pretending to be Angel. It's the same shot they use for Wesley when he is being Angel, when he is being a rogue demon hunter, and also what they use for Angel's son Conger in later seasons, all being like, is it Angel? No, it's someone shorter. I just thought that was quite funny. But yeah, the whole actual motive of the episode in terms of the monster, the hastily scribbled tattoo that he supposedly has, and notably they all refer to it as a tattoo. It's not a tattoo,
it's a branding.
It's a branding or scarification, but like there's no ink involved in it.
So this episode really, I think, brings the theme of like identity theft and identity like surety or knowing yourself really to the front again. Obviously a lot of what we discussed already is that like Jonathan has essentially taken Buffy's place. And yeah, that's once again like, you know, Buffy having her identity stolen. So we had previously with like last week with Faith, and other points during the season. So like in Something Blue and stuff like that. So in this one, we see once again that like Buffy's identity is reasonably rock solid in the sense that like, you know, she has fought through like the whole high school years to find out like, you know, who she is, what she's about, and what she's willing to sacrifice for it. And by this point, it's the fact that she, you know, if you put Buffy in these situations at any point, as she is now, she is going to realize that something is off. She's going to solve the problem because she has a surety of herself. She has a certainty of being. It's kind of like in it contrasts quite nicely with The Wish, where like, you know, if you take Buffy out of Sunnydale and never put her with her friends, she never gets that surety and she's easily killed. She's easily felled. And this one, where she hasn't been removed, she hasn't had her stuff taken away, she's just like, you know, the power structure has shifted, she's still herself, and she still has that certainty of purpose and of vision that allows her to break through.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the way that they describe her in Jonathan verse is at odds with her actual power, which she discovers in practice, because they describe that she was lucky to be able to kill 2 vampires. Whereas like the setting of there being 5 vampires, I think this again is Jonathan's perspective that it must be overwhelming, but 5 vampires feeding, she can do that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that's definitely interesting. I think consistently, again, you could have a show that has their main character kind of constantly have to rediscover who they are, and she has moments of doubt, and I think specifically being overpowered by glory and not knowing how to deal with that initially. Obviously her insecurity when she comes back from the dead, and then kind of her lack of direction in season 7 are all minor cogs in that lack of certainty, but it's all to get her back to the rock solid base she has. And it's actually one of her powers is like always just having this like really clear sense of what she wants to do.
One of the interesting things about this episode is that while there is these kind of like serious identity implications and stuff, it also does read a lot like a interaction with the fan base of the show. So in a couple of different ways. One is that like it's very, this is so clearly just like a Mary Sue episode in the sense that Mary Suing is where you have essentially written yourself into a fantastical situation. You've given yourself incredible powers and the ability to solve all problems, or, you know, overly romanticized your own ability essentially. And it's kind of associated with kind of like an almost masturbatory approach to writing. In a metaphorical sense, if you get me. So one of the essays I was reading this week was Buffy's Mary Sue is Jonathan, Buffy Acknowledges the Fans, by Justine Larbalist. Larbalestier. I said that a couple of times yesterday, and I still managed to fuck it up today.
It's an elegant name.
Yes, it is. So it looks at a couple of different episodes. It looks at The Wish, Doppelgangland, Something Blue, Superstar, and it basically looks at the fan contributions to these different ones.
Cassie, is Something Blue? That's not clicking for me. Which
Something
one?
Blue is the episode where Spike and Buffy want to get married because Willow fucks up a spell.
Oh, that we watched.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so and this kind of essay kind of acknowledges quite thoroughly how fan interaction was like specifically contributed to the show in the sense that Joss Whedon 100% read the Buffy forums.
Use the net, whatever it was.
Well, no, it was actually on the Buffy site. It was called the Bronze, actually. Of course. So people used to post in the Bronze with theories and interact with things, and yeah, he specifically read this, and it was often like there were a couple of references, small references to it through the show, and I think so with episodes like this, you see people you've probably had people writing essays about, oh, well, here's why I think I would be brilliant in this show, and this is kind of lightly poking fun of it, and it, like, Jonathan is the fan, what I'm trying to say here, the fan
insert
surrogate, I suppose.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, the part about Jonathan is just essentially that he he's put himself in this fantastical setting, and here's what she says. It is also commentary on Mary Sue, because Buffy's Mary Sue, Jonathan is unable to control his text, literalized as the monster version of himself. By the end of the pain, his grandiose desires become public knowledge. Not only is he pathetic, but everyone knows that he's pathetic. The object of desire, the show, and its actual central character, Buffy, is punishing the one who desires it, the fan. Based on a newsgroup, mailing list, and other discussion with fellow fans, the response to Superstar is polarized. And basically, apparently, some people saw it as being a fun, engaging, kind of like light, nice, comfortable space, and other people thought it was too close to home.
They felt attacked.
Yeah, which is just great to hear.
Well, what I think is interesting there is I've often thought that this is a very light opinion I have, so I won't change my behaviour, but I've often thought that Mary Sue is a very gendered term, and I always think
that's a good point.
And there are people, there's the less often used Marshy Sue and all this kind of stuff.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, but essentially, like, I think it probably evolves from a certain bias that women tend to be the ones who romanticize characters. The kind of bias where at one point in history people were like, the novel, what a pointless format for women.
That being said, it's important to acknowledge that, like, the vast majority of fan stories, fan writing, fan fiction. Thank you. The vast majority of fan fiction is written by women, or queer people, and if we're acknowledging that fan fiction is not a negative thing.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think
it's a positive thing to acknowledge that, like, it's mostly contributed to by women.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a form of accessible, creative, and often very community driven writing, which is very accepting and very driven by women and by queer people and other minorities, and
fills a niche where the text won't.
And in many texts addresses a need which is lacking in the actual text. I just think the proliferation of the term Mary Sue, particularly by people who might write for The Guardian or something like that, is often it can often be used to be like, oh, this is just a fake story a woman wrote about a real book.
Yeah, that's so true.
But I think you can absolutely use it in context appropriately, and I think this is the perfect example. And also this acknowledges that men do exactly the same thing in terms of being like, maybe if I was Spider-Man, or what would that be like, or an X-Man or whatever, but it's not considered a fanciful thing to do when men were like, oh, it'd be so cool if I was in Call of Duty or whatever, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Or like there's a whole industry surrounding it, which is video games.
yeah. Or actually specifically sports video games.
Oh, so fucking true. Actually, speaking of video games, the other thing we're supposed to talk about for the Bronze Banner this week was The Last of Us 2, which we have been playing, of course, if you're aware of video games at all. But we'll get into that in more detail next week when we actually have played more of it. It's incredible. If you are considering picking it up, do.
It is an example of not just art, but of an artistic masterpiece in video game form. I think over quarantine, I probably played or finished upwards of probably 25 or 30 video games, and listened to far more video games besides. And I really just feel like the hill I'm going to die on is that it is one of the most fantastic artistic mediums.
It's really cool
that we've ever made as a society. Yeah.
It's funny whenever people are like, oh, video games as art, like question mark. It's like
play one.
Well, yeah, play one for sure. And like it's like, oh, well, here are bad games and they cannot be art. And it's like I mean, are you saying that like bad paintings aren't art? Because like no, you're not. You're saying it's bad art. There can be fucking bad art. There can be good art. There can be high art. There can be low art. And well, I'm not sure about those things. Those things are super classist for sure, but also derogatory. I mean, like, anyway, let's be real. A lot of people consider Buffy low art, and
those people are wrong.
So yeah, it's just like, there are video games which tell a story which is remarkable and engaging and visually beautiful, tonally tight and constructed. And if you're considering films to be artistic, then there's no...
Games are interactive and personal and lengthy in a way that most media can't be. And there's some world where all video games are shrimp. So in some worlds, no video games are shrimp.
Do you want to move on to the dusting?
I do.
Great. Okay, so Buffy bits. Do you have anything crazy for us?
I think a headliner one would be that in the bronze, when Jonathan is singing, his voice is supplied. His voice is supplied by Brad Kane, who previously played Tucker Wells.
Yeah, soon to be Andrew Wells. Andrew Wells' older brother.
Yeah. So he supplies his singing voice, and Brad Kane also supplied the singing voice of Aladdin in Disney's Aladdin. Both, which I think we both found quite kind of not suspicious, but it didn't sound like Aladdin, and also Jonathan's singing didn't sound so good that it couldn't have been Jonathan.
Yeah,
but I believe it.
But if you think about it, if he did Aladdin, he was already trying to mimic the guy who voiced Aladdin's, what his singing voice would be. So if you're really like a well-trained vocalist, you can mimic other people's singing styles, so you can adjust your like ability to sing there, so you're not doing crazy runs, you're not doing anything like crazy, you're just like being an old, like, a really capable crooner kind of thing. Yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. I think in terms of Buffy bits, I appreciated in terms of running gags that Jonathan was able to use the crossbow to incredible success. It was like his primary weapon, and it was very effective. Which is another example that this world is broken.
Yeah. This episode actually, like in terms of themes, we've been talking a lot about science versus magic recently, and this episode is definitely an example of like magic run amok, which I think will come more to light as the show progresses. Yeah, and
I think a small but significant note from this episode is that it's once again kind of magic or alternate scenarios revealing things about the primary world to a certain degree. One thing that contributes is Ongi's extensive understanding of things like alternate universes and having really kind of a first-hand knowledge of the supernatural that many of the other supernatural characters on the show actually fail to display.
Yeah, for sure.
Spike might have met a feral demon in a bar once, but Anya has kind of academic understanding of it.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, A, she's a lot older.
Yeah.
And B, I think she's like, she kind of like had to know all this stuff because she was creating it and interacting with it a lot.
I just think it's a really interesting note to bring. It's a good way to differentiate, characters. You can have knowledgeable characters and characters less not knowledgeable, but to understand where their knowledge comes from, how they contribute, it's how you really add texture, I think, to characters.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to mention was a small but significant note is that Jonathan identifies that Agam's power source is a small core of uranium-237, which Maggie Walsh had hidden in his design, which actually the knowledge of which is how they managed to defeat Agam at the end of the series. I also think something just to carry forward is Jonathan is an interesting character for us to revisit, and I think this adds a big part to that, because while he's portrayed as a sympathetic character and he has a number of opportunities for growth, he never does grow, like not definitely not physically, but also in his two other significant appearances in the show, he is also incredibly problematic. So I actually think he's a really great cipher for this feminist show as to men who can in some ways mean well, or some ways have aspects which are positive but are still part of the problem. Essentially, he's a problem right up until when he dies.
He sure is.
Spoilers, sorry. Spoilers, Jonathan dies.
Jonathan does die. So a couple of things there. at one point, Anya's reading the Jonathan biography, and she says, "Jonathan." I just got to the part where Jonathan invented the internet, which is a very, very cute note because that was something that's been attributed to the Al Gore biography over the years. Is that Al Gore invented the internet? He never claimed to have done so, so that's kind of funny. And what else do I have? Oh yeah, Buffy's wavy hair is back because it's fake again.
Yeah. Buffy's reality is stored in her hair.
Yeah, sure fucking is. Okay, and fashion.
If this podcast was about Jonathan, in the Jonathan verse, what would it be called?
It'd be the Jonathan Jokers.
Jonathan Jokers. And we probably really like the film The Joker as well because Jonathan was in it.
I would be so thrilled to watch Jonathan and the Joker. Yeah.
So in terms of fashion, some not great fashion in this episode. A lot of it worn by Jonathan.
Yeah.
None of his clothes fit. Even in his wildest fantasy, none of his clothes fit.
It was the early noughties. He didn't get a tailor or anything.
Don't like it.
He wears white tie at one point, and you pointed out that he takes off his bow tie, and it looks just like weird and awful. And you're right.
He looks like an out of work wager. The Tara is wearing an embroidered jacket with her back is kind of embroidered with floral patterns, and it just looks really, really bad. It looks like a bad tattoo but on a jacket. Mm-hmm. And otherwise, I think that there's a lot of extras who are just wearing like very Primark pennies, kind of bright primary color shirts. In the bronze scene, and particularly in the was it the espresso pump, is that what it's called as well? Espresso pump, yeah. Those extras in that scene in the espresso pump just looks like something that's Sex and the City, and I just don't feel like it fits particularly well with the style of the show.
But Willow at the beginning of the episode wears just the most ridiculously large, like fluffy fur coat. It's about 4 sizes too big. I also don't think Willow would wear fur, so maybe it's synthetic fur. And Xander wears an incredibly yellow, like canary yellow shirt at one point. It didn't look awful, but it did not look well. I thought Riley's dress was notable in this episode just for being so fucking bland. And Xander's haircut throughout just looks genuinely awful.
Yeah, and kind of inconsistent as well.
Yeah. He was trying different ways to style it, and none of them worked. Okay, and death count. Do you have one for me there, Joel?
Yeah, so I think this was a reasonably deathy episode.
So I saw this on the Buffy Wikipedia page, the Buffy wiki, and I don't agree with some of the attributions.
Okay, let's have a look. So 1 vampire dusted by Buffy. Unidentified guy drained by a vampire nest. I'd agree with that. A vampire nest, 3 dusted by Jonathan, 2 by Buffy. Okay, I see where the problem is now. Let's skip over that and come back to it. A librarian woman killed by Agam. She had a blood disease. And the Thamogenesis monster, which was pushed into a hole which is never mentioned again, to hell, presumably, or to the core of the earth. And yes, the body count also mentions that both Mayor Wilkins and the Master were killed by Jonathan in this alternate reality. But surely, if you want to follow that logic, it would imply that almost everything has been killed by Jonathan.
Yeah,
so
no, it's bizarre.
Yeah, so I would not include those in this episode.
Yeah. Do we have a rating? Do you have a rating for it?
Do you have a rating for it? I would give this episode probably an 8.1 Jonathans.
Okay.
I would not watch a second episode of the Jonathan show, but I actually, having seen a lot of these kind of episodes, I actually think this is definitely done. I think it is restrained in many ways, and I think actually something interesting to say, not just for its critique or its observation of fandom and men in this context, but actually contributes to this ongoing story of the show as well. So.
I don't think I liked that. I thought that it would be better if it felt like a standalone episode as opposed to one that tries also to advance the plot.
Yeah, maybe, but I suppose I think that can be polarizing, as I think you sometimes, and I think people sometimes can really like completely bottle episodes.
Yeah.
I think by and large it is a higher quality thing to strive for, to have things continue to move forward rather than being potentially syndicatable. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm going to go for 6.4 Latin in front of the books out of 10.
That's a big differential between us.
Yeah. I just like the moment to moment episode-ness of it. I didn't find it particularly enjoyable as a sit through episode. I thought it was like, it's a funny concept. It was genuinely funny at times. I thought the structure was drawn out, and it didn't have quite enough of a punch towards the end. The conclusion was a little lacking.
I think it's because the monster as a concept, even in fleeting, is weak.
Yeah. And it was kind of doing a lot of things. It was like, anyway. So yeah, that's my rating. Cordelia Jace. Are you ready for it, Joel?
Yeah, so tell us what this week's episode of Angel was about.
So this week's episode of Angel was called Eternity, and it was about a starlet whose name I cannot remember.
Rebecca.
What was her other name though?
Oh God, no one knows.
Anyway.
Chambers? No, that's a Resident Evil character. Sorry.
But I remember everyone knew her as one thing, and her name was actually Rebecca. Anyway, that's fine. So she is a starlet who's aging out of the business. She doesn't get roles. She's being stalked. So she asks Angel to help her because they accidentally stumble upon her being attacked. It turns out it's her manager organizing the attacks, so the whole stalking subplot is kind of unimportant. What is important though is that she wants to become a vampire to stay young forever. I'm not sure how she plans on getting any roles in California, not being able to be in the sun. But sure, fuck it. And she tries to drug Angel to get him to bite her, and in doing so accidentally creates a synthetic Angelus. So
I think absolutely that's the bulk of it. It was a more enjoyable and more interesting episode to watch than I remembered, but because of how strange it is, I think. Essentially the plot of the episode is that they run into a she's meant to be like a fading actress. She's actually meant to be like 26, and she was a famous child star, etc. And it culminates with Angel becoming her bodyguard and her wanting him to turn her to a vampire. But what it is it's a remnant of an earlier draft of Angel as a show. So the premise initially for Angel was going to be mostly an anthology series. So the focus on each episode would be the guest actor and the guest story, an anthology series being your Twilight Zones, your Outer Limits, something more in that vein. And Angel would be there and the crew would be there, but there were more there to move the episode forward, to move the case forward, and introduce some interesting supernatural concepts every week. Now obviously they moved away from that with much more focus on the core three, but also in later seasons on their own drama rather than necessarily really people they were helping week to week. So this episode very much focuses on her, very similar to the much worse episode earlier in the season about the dentist or the plastic surgeon who was like harassing someone with his eyeballs.
Awful.
And what we're looking to do in this is, I think, to show LA, to show, they're trying to talk about celebrity culture. They're trying to use the setting that Angel is in and make him the fish out of water, because he's very uncomfortable. He doesn't know anything about film and about we have a bizarre reappearance of a guy who cameoed in the first episode and gave Angel his card. He turns out to be her manager. It's kind of all about that. So as a set piece, that's interesting. As the conversation that they're having around, she feels like everything is so fleeting and yet he's hundreds of years old, is an interesting concept. And Cordelia gets a lot of screen time because this is her area. I think one of the best scenes in the episode is actually the opening scene where Wesley and Angel we get close shots of them discussing strategy to escape this certain death that they're in for. And it's actually Cordelia doing
A Doll's House
on stage. Methinks my lover Thorold will return with one a day. It's really awful. And I think
it's so funny because people portray A Doll's House as being so stuffy, but it's one of the most timeless texts of all time.
But I'm sure there are stagings of it which are very stuffy.
I'm sure.
And so I think that's an interesting. All those elements are interesting. Do they come together into the most memorable or interesting episode of television of all time? No. Some of the acting is flat. I think the actress who plays Rebecca is perfectly fine, but she's not super likable. I think she kind of needs to be slightly more likable for what she's doing. I think Angel is very funny throughout, and I think what is bizarre and interesting is this is one of only two examples in the whole 5 seasons of Angel where they actually bring Angelus back. And it's Wesley makes they really
didn't wait long to blow their load in it in the season 1.
True. And Wesley makes an astute point, the separation, that Angel doesn't have to have sex to lose his soul. He just needs to experience perfect happiness, which commingled with Buffy. But in this, Rebecca artificially induces a state of a drug high, essentially. And that brings Angelus out. I think Angelus is played well. I think it feels like Angelus. I think the way the darkness he brings with the menace and how he plays on both Wesley and Cordelia's insecurities is actually that's pitch perfect for me. That feels like Angelus. I just think the fact that they don't do Angelus again until season 5 is just strange in terms of choices.
Sure, yeah.
And the fact that the 2 times they do it are in season 1 and 5, which are probably 2 of the weaker seasons of the show, is interesting. So yeah, I think overall I'd probably give it maybe a 7 failed feminist gestures.
Sure, I was going for 6 failed feminist gestures. I just found it kind of boring.
Yeah, but you know, we can just patch that clip in at the start of every Cordelia chase, really.
Thanks. Next week in Cordelia Chase is going to be either 5x5 or Sanctuary. I can't tell which comes first, but I'm very excited for that.
I think it's 5x5 up first, and Faith.
Yeah, Faith
comes
is back to LA to pursue Angel.
I actually think this week's episode of Angel and Buffy play fairly well together in the sense they're both about kind of artificial celebrity, and also artificially induced settings. You know, so yeah, I think. An interesting experiment
for sure. Next week in Buffy actually is Where the Wild Things Are, so that's going to be a shit show. So the Angel part is going to be a real relief.
The Angel part of it, yeah. Definitely. So Angel might be your favorite thing about next week.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that brings us to a close. And as always, thanks very much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, we'd really appreciate if you let us know, and make sure to tell your friends and tell Jonathan. And Brian and I will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Take care. See you.
It's fun.